Good morning, this is Monty Jason Schaefer, and happy May Day. Today is May 1st. The concept of the May Day poll where children dance, go above and below, is very common. And it looks like even in some areas today it still is practiced. And then at night, it seems like the adults would also do a pole and dance, maybe without their clothes on. The idea of this was found in ancient America, and somehow it's tied to the Wiccans, and it's a pagan thing maybe, who knows. But the idea is that the pole represents a phallus going into the ground. And then, are you worshiping the phallus? Because the phallus gives seed. When the seed is planted in the well of a woman, that's when a child is born. So the May Day celebration is today. You know, a pole is obviously something you can hang a flag from. In ancient America, they seem to have these little things where they would kind of do like a ring toss, so maybe they'd have a shorter pole, and they'd do a ring toss with attached string or something, and they would try to, land the ring on top of the pole. So a pole is a very important tool in agrarian society because it helps you tell time. If you're telling time based off of the sun is the light. If you're in the north hemisphere, the shadow is only in the north. And as the sun moves across the pole from the south, the shadow gets shorter and shorter. And when the shadow is at the shortest point in the day, that is true north, or solar north, as opposed to magnetic north. And so if you know magnetic or solar north, and you can build a right angle, you know the true east-west cardinal coordinates quite easily. And apparently if you're an outdoorsman, you can just observe the shadows for about 20 minutes and do some calculations to find true north, solar north. So having a pole, having multiple poles, you could use the intersection of shadows. And then obviously as the seasons get longer and there's more light and dark, you would change things. So from my recollection, the Romans had a 18-hour day, and noon was solar noon, and they're not saying it was 18, they're saying it's 12, but yeah, I don't know that that's the case. If you go back anciently, I think they had 18 hours. And so what they would do is they would divide the day as a function of solar noon. And so an hour could be anywhere from 42 minutes long to longer, depending on if you're calling it 12 hours or 12 divisions in a day and a night. The Egyptians about a 36-hour day. So apparently dementia has taken over. The Vedics had units of time, like a blink of an eye. They had 1/30th of a day, which is interesting. And obviously the Islam faith, they have their hours of the day before sunrise where they do their prayers. After solar noon, they have this big window where they can pray kind of at any time. The other prayers are kind of fixed. So there's a lot of emphasis around praying before sunrise. So they know what nautical sunrise is, or first light. All the sunrise calculations are a function of the ecliptic, so they don't account for the mountains. But it is something. So last time I started reading Isaiah 24 and I said this was fulfilled. There's this thing about being upside down. Panim, upside down. Interesting. That's very interesting. It's one of the faces. So it's interesting how one word can mean all of these things, and in this case it was translated as upside down. Or why not backward? And so if we were to look at the Greek, which is older, which is before the Messiah death event, it doesn't say upside down, it says uncover its face. So if the tabernacle is covered, it's now uncovered. Tabernacle, I mean the temple, if the veil is broken. Scatter its inhabitants. So if you didn't tear down the temple, but you know the Romans are coming, you're going to flee. So anyway, I went through and talked about this. I had some curiosities about things that seem to have been erased. So if I were to search for wine, 212 times. I don't think a wine press is a wine press. So red wine might be different than white wine. Mixed wine, you might have actually had alcoholic wine mixed in your water if your water wasn't very potable, very clean or pure. So strong wine. So what about the Mesopotamian word for beer? 2 times. And it's a place. So we're saying in the land of the Levant, where you can easily make beer, so they removed the word beer. So I'm just putting a probability that somehow beer was associated with the death event. Why else would they remove it? Why else would they want to separate themselves from that drink? There's, obviously ethnocentric reasons. We drink wine. The beer comes from the north, the Babylonians or the Assyrians or the Akkadians. But I just find that very odd. So a lot of people call this apocalyptic. I call this already fulfilled. This is the Messiah death event. The city is a heap. The defense city is a ruin. It shall never be built. What does that mean? What is it? So na is a greeting. So bana in Hebrew is the good greeting. That's being called to be built. Yeah. So people that want to rebuild the temple of Jehovah that builded Solomon or builded Herod, maybe they should read this. Strength to the poor. So this is what I was finishing with last time. Like somewhere it talks about only the poor survived. The branch of the terrible ones shall be brought low. So who are these terrible ones? Aris, the lions, the keepers. Aritz, so that's an Egyptian word. The ruthless ones. So this is basically saying Pontius Pilate died, possibly. So there's a feast, so this could have been part of the... So is this after the death event or during the death event? Was there some cannibalistic activity? He will destroy in this mountain the face of the covering and the veil. This is saying the veil of the temple was broken. He will swallow up death in victory. Now, how do they know it's he and not she? And maybe it could just say the human will be swallowing up death. The sacred family will be swallowing up death. Interesting. Maha. Mahka. I think Ma kind of means the place of. Yeah, so Panim always means face. So how did that mean upside down? She'll take away from far off. What does take away mean? Shur is bowl, wall. So there's a word play there. We talked about that before, the word bowl. Wall. There's a wordplay off of that. And so it could be a mistranslation. So this is literally saying salvation is Messiah. Yasa, Kava, Sama, Yeshua. And so then, when you think about this broken language, is it uppercase or lowercase? Was it the original meaning? So this is an example of this. For in this mountain, the hilltop of whatever they call this, it's misnamed Mount Horeb. Mount Horeb means the mountain of all mountains. Har Har. The mountain shall be the hand of the Lord rest. So I think this is Mount Moriah. And Moab. That isn't necessarily Moab. So Moab is the name of the land named after one of the sons of Lot who got intoxicated with wine or some other strong drink like beer. And the daughter slept with him because they needed children to preserve their mother's family tree. But if you decompose this, it seems like this kind of means place. and Ab obviously means father. So it would mean the father of this place, or the father's place. What did Yeshua call the temple? My father's house. And the fortress of the high forts shall be bring down low, even to dust. The temple is destroyed. And so this play on words with wall is likely the sure word again. So now we got song. We've got a huge play on the word ear. Ear, song, song. So this is a different word for wall. Como kail. So let's just look at sir. So you can see it once there. You can see it right there. Biome, Hayu, Usur. So those are similar. So this dash means they think it's a new word, I think, meaning it was run together, but they think it was a new word. In the land, Judah, ear, as, Lanu, Yazid, Komat, Vahil. I didn't get Bahil out of that. So it seems like what happens is the destruction after the death event. People just stayed away. For 20 years, it seems like people could live there. So Jacob, the brother of Jesus, James the Just, seemed to have gathered the people there, which means, was he not there before? Did he observe this? Was he there and survived and didn't die, didn't join the disciples? Or was he up in Nazareth and came down and saw what was going on? Was his mother still alive? The only people walking there are the poor. So if there was this major destruction event, and you're the Romans, and you said, oh, we first lost Pontius, the Jews tore down the temple, we sent our entire legion in Capernaum down to kill everyone, seemed to be going well, and then something happened from the sky and everyone's dead. Are you going to go back? If you're the Romans? Not likely. You might send some spies in, and then all of a sudden we have a huge disruption in the hierarchy. We have 4 Roman Caesars in the 70 ADs. It seems like this area of the Levant, anyone that was speaking Aramaic was living under complete autonomy. Maybe they were paying taxes, maybe they weren't. So again, this is this notion, like as a woman with child. So this is part of the torture event. And it's likely a blood eagle of some sort. The dead men shall live. Seems to be talking about the resurrection. Kum, to rise. Kus, to awake. Couscous. Nepal, Nepal. So Rephaim seems to be the dead. You know, we have the Nephilim and the Rephaim. These are the ones that so the Rephaim are gonna fall, meaning that's the second death from my estimation. And so it seems that what we call Matthew 24 is completed. The resurrected appear. They kill all the Romans until the eye for an eye, life for a life. Under the Mosaic law, as resurrected beings, they can come down and kill those that led to their death. And so there's got to be some rage there. And that's one of the emotions of being human, and I would say that's an emotion of being a god. This is just. So now we have the word cross, but not in the term that we normally associate with it. To cross over. So it seems like the resurrected come and get their vengeance. So if you're alive, you probably shut your doors and prayed. Sounds like the fiction that is the modern interpretation of the Passover. And so there's a punishment, right? You just killed 5,000 innocent people. And it's all a function of the sin of Sodom and Gomorrah. You're running the temple, you're running the stole, you're stealing the food, extorting the poor. Some guy calls you out on it, and you kill him with 5,000 of his friends. And so it will not cover the dead. So these are probably the retaliation dead, the avenged. And so now we have something more kind of in a larger scale, that the Leviathan is this red dragon. Oh, now we have red wine. So Leviathan doesn't mean whale. So notice Nakash, and Tanin. So Tanin and Leviathan are likely synonyms, and this may go back to Revelation, the red dragon. A vineyard of red wine. Why are they emphasizing red? Kamed. So what is white wine? And that just means attractive. No beauty shall he have. A vineyard of attractiveness. And that's a reference to Isaiah 5. Let me sing you a song of the vineyard. The good desire. So finally the vine has been restored. So so this is Isaiah likely referring to a song from before that he's applying it to Jerusalem and Judah. Now I'll sing my beloved a song of my beloved touching his vineyard. My beloved had a vineyard and a very fruitful hill. He fenced it and gathered the stones and planted with it the choicest vine, and built a tower, and also made a wine press, and looked that it should bring forth grapes, but it brought forth wild grapes. The word for wild grape is the fox grape. So, anab is the generic form of grape, but the fox grape is be sheen. Stinkberries, poisonous grapes. The labrasque, which might be the modern form of all grapes that are available to us. Anciently, there were lots and lots of strands of grape, but it seems like every wine comes from one common denominator these days. So it seems like he's making a reference here that the poison vine has been cleansed. I would go through the fire, the briars and thorns, and I will burn them together. Fury is not in me. Sounds like fury is in me. I'm killing everyone. And so the length of this one seems to be much longer in the Greek. It is not there. It is not accepted of her. That doesn't seem like that's long enough. Google Translate. It is not there. It is not accepted of her. All of that says that little. Okay. I am not. I was treated to them. I am guarding me. Good to them. I have set it up. That is what the Lord God has always spoken to me in order to compose them. So it seems like Google Translate might be tying into some predefined translations of the Septuagint, and not getting into the actual translation. So it's specifically saying the people, the Yasab, inhabitants of Jerusalem, and the men of Judah. Oh. Wrong one. So that is not this. Something about briars and thorns. So why would they make such a deviation? It's because all you would have to do is do a map. Can I take the Hebrew Septuagint? Can I get its concepts? Can I take the Greek Septuagint, get its concepts, take the Hebrew, get its concepts, compare the correlation of the concepts and say, how far is this deviated? You could manually go verse by verse, but you could write algorithm to do that. So now we have some metaphors of a tree. We have out of the stem of Jesse, the branch, the root, and here we have root, blossom, bud, and the face of the fruit. So we have something about being smote and smitten, shoot forth. The iniquity of Jacob is purged. The stones of the altar are as chalk stone that have been ground to nothing. The Asherah groves and the images do not stand up. So you need to remember what the temple ground is. So if I'm a poor family and I'm going to my annual festival and I can barely buy a bird, and let's just put it in a modern frame. Let's say I have one son and one daughter and my spouse. So we show up We go and we buy a bird. And do we see the whole process? Or at some point, do they give us less meat than what we ordered? Do we lose some of the value? But because I'm poor, what do I have with me? I likely have a bowl. So there's some boiling process going on, so there's some ability possibly to have gravy. There might be a place where they're also selling, cooked berries, like hot berries, so you could have some sort of fresh jam you could put on your meat and or your bread. Your wife probably prepared bread. She likely took to the temple a cake for Queen Ashra, the Queen Mother of Heaven. And I think we talk about unleavened bread, bread without yeast, and they've removed beer altogether, so yeast was probably in the bread for the Queen Mother of Heaven. And so a man, his entire life since he was a boy, likely has a spoon. That's his one eating tool. So he likely has a bowl and a spoon. And if he's poor, it's probably wooden. And if he's wealthy, it's probably brass, because everything in the temple, all the instruments of cooking seem to be brass if you read Solomon's description of the dedication. So the woman would probably have a small cutting board. She would have her bread on it. And if they could afford it, they would have cheese or butter, which is milk product. And so she would always have in her possession a knife, and not a sharp knife, not like a knife like to cut meat, but like just a spreading knife. It's not serrated in any way. They don't cut their bread, they break their bread. But if they have a creamy cheese or a jam or something, they can use the knife to spread it on the bread. The man could use his spoon for that same purpose, but the spoon is a big spoon. And so those would be the utensils they would have. The woman would have a very small flat board, a bread board or a plate. The man would have a fairly large eating bowl. You could hold it in your two hands, not super big. He would have a spoon, she would have a knife. And they would get their barbecue, they would have their cheese and whatever else they'd have, and they'd sit under a tree and have a picnic. And maybe they had set up a maypole, an Asherah pole, if you read some of this. And the children would go play. There was probably an area for the where there was water spraying, like a little water park for the kids. This is not hard to imagine. If it's hot out, you need that. It's spring, so that's probably not the case at this moment. But then you go back to Josiah, and what happened? He listened to a woman, the prophetess. He went to all the other temples that were up in the mountaintops. He cut down the Asherah trees, destroyed the images, and destroyed the chalk. So did he read this Isaiah thing, or did he read something else that was more explicit, that wasn't as cryptic? The nice thing about Isaiah is because it's cryptic, it made it to us. The defense city will be desolate. It's empty. We've now heard this expression twice. Badan. So it's also saying it's isolated, right? So I'm telling you, for 20 to 30 years, no one dares. Like if Pompeii erupts, if all these Romans get killed and that gets translated, no one wants to go there. And it seems to show that this is the boundary of desolation. By desolation, I mean this is where the poor can just live freely in the city of Jerusalem, because no one's going to come and challenge them. The city is vacant except for the poor. So this is talking about a wadi in the Sinai, so not all the way to the Nile. And all of the outcasts, now flow unto Jerusalem. This is where the poor gather. So it seems like Ephraim was a problem just like Judah was. So the lost tribes, in that whole narrative, there's remnants of all of the tribes, and people know their genealogies. But recall Isaiah in his day, he went to the king and said, Ephraim is confederate with Babylon or Assyria, when the king didn't even want to talk to him, when they met out on the viaducts. And Isaiah intentionally took his 18-year-old son because with the king was the betrothed woman who was pregnant, who was about 17. That was the purpose, is so they could get along and talk to each other, the young ones. We don't have the knowledge what they talked about. So everyone wants to throw Judah under the bus with killing the Messiah, but Ephraim seems to be part of the problem as well. So now we have a strong drink. But we shakar. So I would say a strong drink is not beer. I would say a strong drink is, a whiskey or a malt or something made out of grain, but it's very, very strong. And again, this could have been being forced to drink the blood of a human. Led astray by the tree, they were aroused, they became unconscious. All the tables are full of vomit and filthiness. That leans towards eating and drinking something that you didn't want to eat or drink. And so I've made the comment before that the temple was a teaching area. Now that the temple is destroyed, who's going to teach? There's no one left to teach. And so likely Yeshua was discovered at the age of 12. He became a teacher. Maybe this is where he met his woman. And but you got to understand, if he's teaching Isaiah and he says don't rob the poor, the rich kids at the school are not going to like it. So at some point, Yeshua likely got invited to leave the school. So I imagine that he would, then take a donkey and a cart and kind of have a traveling school. Maybe a puppeteer. He would teach things, and some of these lessons on the Sermon on the Mount and all this, it might have been a lesson that a young child could understand through a puppeteer teaching it. But it also had a hidden meaning for the adults, right? This is the whole idea of a parable, is that it's easy enough for a child to understand, but it has a deeper meaning. We have made a covenant with death, and the hell we are agreed upon. So it seems like one of the gods loves to make covenants and contracts, and the other one seems to be opposed to that, because those lead to control mechanisms. So if you have a nice house, you've got to exploit the poor more because you need a nicer house, or your children need a nicer house. So it seems like the covenant was some sort of protection. You'll stay in power if you do what I tell you. And that all gets changed. So Perazim was one of the children of Tamar. So we have barley and rye. We have strong drink, but we don't have beer. They're mentioning cumin. That's very interesting. I didn't know cumin was local to that area. I wonder if cumin is a... So I've been thinking about that as well. How did they grind the salt? Did they have pepper when they were doing their barbecue? What was available to them in terms of spices? So this is an interesting scripture. I don't know if that's what that said. Somewhere it says there'll be like a chariot crushing a plowshare. So this is clearly talking about the city of David. Ariel, Ari, El, the keeper of El, which might be the battle. So El versus Jehovah might be the... So Ari can mean lion, but certainly... So when his name is Israel, why is his name not Israel? Why is it not tied to Jehovah, but El? And they've tried to piece those all together. So this is interesting that it's the city of Jehovah here. Because it has the Ir is city, but then it has this ending, which is very interesting. Kiria. The foundations. So this could be talking about the war in heaven. To encounter. So El and Jehovah kind of being juxtaposed. So who speaks out of the dust? The dead that live. And this isn't atom dust, clay dust. This is afar. The multitude of the terrible ones. So I imagine that to be the legions of Rome shall be as chaff. So if you recall, was it Elijah? He was on the run, somebody was trying to attack him. They go to a city, and his servant's like, we're in trouble. And Elijah's like, okay. And he says, praise to God. Open my servant's eyes so he's not an idiot. And Elijah basically says, those that are with us are more than those that are against us. Yeshua sort of says that at some point. It seems like one of these angelic soldiers can kill 70,000 men in a night. And so it doesn't matter how big your legion is, you're not coming back. If you just said, we just sent in 20,000 troops into Jerusalem to quell the rebellion, we killed lots of people, but then something came from heaven. There was this big earthquake, and then some light came down, and all of our men are dead. Thunder, Jehovah, the God of thunder. Tupa, the God of thunder in ancient America. Thor, the god of thunder. Wonder why they have a son of God being the god of thunder. Yeah. So this is interesting. The prophets and your rulers has covered it. And so this is the fundamental pride. For the wisdom of the wise men shall perish, and the understanding of the prudent men shall be hid. So this religion that got created that led to the death of Messiah was intended to be a good religion, but over the centuries it got philosophized into what it was. So that this is just the nature of institutions. With their lips they do honor me, but their hearts are far removed from me. So this is the famous scripture, the clay is telling the potter how it was created, which is just utter stupid. So it seems like this is kind of giving a boundary condition. The Lebanon shall be turned into a fruitful field and a forest. So what was Lebanon at the time? So if you were to take a place that was growing crops, and you no longer have workers to grow the crops, within 100 years, that's going to turn into a forest. So first, flowers are going to grow, then it's going to grow grasses and flowers, and then it's going to start growing trees. So within 200 years, Lebanon, which may have been something that they'd cleared before, they'd cut the trees down to grow crops, but no one's there working, within 200 years, it's going to be a forest again. So the meek and the poor, remember, they were promised the kingdom of heaven. They didn't die. Jacob is now ashamed because the leadership has done this. So they took some truth that was given to Jacob and they kept altering it, they kept calling it doctrine, and before they know it, they're killing their own Messiah. And so I think this might be a new section of Isaiah, but it's still talking about prophet. So this is important. The flaming fiery servant is the proof of who Yeshua was. So they have all these words for lion. Adi is the strong lion, an old lion is lais, a young lion, a lion's whelp is a different word. But there it is, the saraf. Then they've added oop with a lot more here. What is this? That is not that, but they're saying it's that. And so maybe what this is suggesting is the rich people of Jerusalem were sending all of their gold that they were stealing and hiding it in a vault or somewhere in Egypt. So maybe they were avoiding taxes. Their Bahamas was Egypt, so they didn't have to pay Rome if there was no taxes to be paid. So Isaiah is calling. No, how about Isaiah 4? Where's the calling with the cherub? So this is interesting. And in that day, 7 women. In that day, the women that made the oath of the earth will take hold of one man. Let us be with you. So when I think of 7, I think of 7 being the oath that is not 8. So apparently I don't recall the calling. Is it? It's not 1st chapter 2. I can't find it. How about a coal? Chapter 6. So this is the calling of Isaiah. I'm not smart enough. I'm in the throne room of God. There are seraphim round about, and one of them have a live coal in his hand, but it's not in his hand. It's on a tongue in his hand. And he touches it to my lips so that I'm quick to speak. I'm quick-witted. I have a quick tongue. And one of the seraphim did this, touched my tongue so I was quick. Saraf. Saraf. Or is that Sharaf? No, it's Saraf. Now, what is that? Acts 2:52. I'm looking for the scripture about Stephen. Some people believe that Stephen was actually killed and Paul was one of the guys throwing the stones. But where is it that it says he looks up to heaven and sees Yeshua on the right hand of God? I thought that was Acts 2. So I might be struggling today. Because we're living in a fluxed time dimension. I swear it was Acts 2:52 that said, and Stephen, being full of the Holy Ghost, as he's about ready to die, he looks up and sees the Son of God on the right hand, and I'm not finding it. Hopefully I can find this one. So the calling of Isaiah. So I call this the proof of Yeshua being the Son of God. So in Isaiah makes an announcement that the king is dead, but you better worry because his son is going to be righteous, Hezekiah. There it is. So this is the proof of Yeshua. Right here. For out of the serpent's root shall come forth a cockatrice, and his fruit, or his long-term descendant, will be a seraph. So the Nakash is referring to Ahaz. The root, is that his seed? And his fruit, so the fruit is what passes into a woman. The fruit of the womb. It's called a flaming, fiery, flying serpent. Oof. The shining one. The flying one. It's the seraph. So that is the proof. Isaiah is like, okay, I have this vision. God calls me. A seraph who's on the right hand of God. Calls me to teach. And I announce that Ahaz is dead, but from Ahaz's posterity will come this seraph. Now, was it the seraph that touched his lip or a different seraph? We don't have that information, but obviously that was a connection Isaiah would have had internally. He saw 4 seraph in the chamber or throne of God. One of them touched his lip. He saw that one of those seraph would come to earth. $7.55. Okay. Why do I have 252? So who would be brave enough to come back to Jerusalem after it's desolate? It would be those that were living outside of Jerusalem that had powers of leadership. They come back and they're thinking, oh, because I'm in the upper class, I should be leaders. And Stephen is one of these poor guys. And he's just reminding, oh, you sound like those people that just all died because... But you got to understand, what year is Acts? Acts is the year 60. Right? So this is the transition that there's this power vacuum. Jerusalem is desolate. Only the poor live there. 30 years pass, people start to kind of trickle back in, and this is what you have. So today is T-4. So if I were to take a square with a radius of 1, and that's a square, so that means it would be a 2 by 2 square, I get a box, the whole idea of a square, whose area is 4. Regleros, boxes, squares, right angles. This is the whole foundation of a rule system. 3.14. The 3 came together and created a rule system. The rule system they created was to replace the legacy system. And so now instead of a square, now they have a circle with radius 1. And the area of the circle is 3.14159 pi r squared. So instead of the area being 4, the area is now 3.14. So to visualize that, if you have the cardinal directions and you were to put 4 pins in the cardinal directions, you'd have to put one in the northeast, northwest, southeast, southwest. And you could possibly put a 5th pin in the center to know where the center is. And that would be the boundaries. So what a circle is doing is it's shaving off the corners. It's smoothing the corners. And so you can inscribe a circle in a square quite simply. The square becomes a circle, and you lose, if you do the subtraction, right? 4 minus 3.14, you lose about 85% of the rules. So this is 0.85 divided by 4 as a percentage. So 4 minus pi calculator to the new screen. So 4 minus 3.14 is 86. So as a percentage, it's a 21% reduction in area. So 21%, look at your hands. 21%, 20%, your two thumbs. So it's a 20% reduction in rules. It's likely more than that, but that's the concept of it. So what that means is in this universe, the ratio of the circumference of a circle to its diameter, or the diameter, is pi, right? 3.14. In other universes, it might be 3, it might be 4. We don't know. We just know what we know here. But now if I wanted to create 4 pillars to represent the circle, I could actually place them in the cardinal directions. The sunrise is the cardinal direction, east. You can put a post in the ground. Behind you, where the sun sets, is the opposite of that cardinal direction, west. And then, as I explained, if you have a maypole in the center, you can find north, which is the land of shadow, and south, which is the land of light. All of it's anchored to the sun first and foremost. So now those cardinal poles are not in the corners, they're actually in the cardinal directions. So now with 5 poles, you can have the center of the universe and understand the cardinal direction, which is east, its opposite, which is west, its shadow, which, do you focus on the shadow or light? So should south be the cardinal direction if we're in the North Pole? And then the shadow. So east and south should be the cardinal directions because those are the sunrise and the light. The opposite of those is the sunset and the not light, or the shadow. And that's for those of us living in the north. So the rules of the system seem to be improved by cutting the corners. But there needs to be a beta test between legacy and the new system. And whether this universe, or specifically this Earth, or whatever, there's a beta test. So to be a beta test, you have to have what are called boundary spanners. These are the beta testers. They're going to test the borders to demonstrate the supremacy of the new system over the legacy system. There's a bunch of use cases, and it seems like we have some. Abraham's a dropship. He's married to a bitter, desolate woman. She says, have a child with this man, this woman, Hagar, so he does, and then she gets angry and sends him away. Abraham's sad, but he just falls in line. Empowering the woman. Is that a beta test? Then we know that his firstborn is Ishmael. That's his firstborn. Maybe he had lots of semen come out of his phallus at some point, but the first semen that came out of his phallus that created a child that we know of, and again, I'm not going to be misogynist, maybe he had daughters first, so they would have been the firstborn. But under the legacy system, it seems like it was kind of misogynist, so we only have knowledge of his sons. Abraham had 8 sons. The firstborn was Ishmael. Then he had Isaac. And then he had 6 sons of Midian. And that's important because Isaac marries and has Rebecca, and it seems like Rebecca kind of does some trickery here. So Rebecca does some trickery here. So now Isaac has Esau, Jacob. Jacob has this weird life where he expects that Rachel will be first, and he accuses Laban, the white, of cheating him. But you need to understand, his mother cheated Isaac. Isaac was blind or nearly blind, and they cheated Esau out of the birthright. Jacob hides from Esau his whole life. When he finally meets Esau, Esau treats him like a brother, hugs him, whatever, is over the whole concept of a birthright. So Jacob loves money and possession and land. He wants the double portion of being the firstborn. He's not. Isaac is not the firstborn. Jacob is not the firstborn. So the Hebrew religion, they have to do somersaults to explain why the firstborn is not the firstborn. And then Judah is not the firstborn. Reuben is. And then you could say, well, Joseph was the firstborn of Rachel and he loved Rachel more. It doesn't matter. Reuben is the firstborn. Well, Reuben slept with one of the concubines, wasn't his mother. And even so, he's still the firstborn. So this idea of some sort of capricious birthright is not the God I worship, right? So it could be that somehow the secondborn is greater, but I've already done the math, right? A youngest child is always greater in the spiritual creation. So if we're having iterations, who am I in relation to my son or daughters? Or, I don't have daughters in this life iteration. But my parents, my siblings, where am I in relationship? That at this moment is only knowable based on the ability to discern truth and light. I have no idea where I rank there. But in the celestial frame of creation, the spiritual creation, a son is greater than the father. Full stop. In the physical creation, for the physical attributes, that would also have to be true. So we're supposed to believe some fictitious DNA averaging thing. Half of the DNA splits, and half of it splits, and it creates a DNA chain. That's only what's observable. Right? There's so much of science that they claim to be truth or factual that's only observable. And so then they get anchored into truth systems. Like according to Hebrew, the grammar rules of that. How many times have I demonstrated that Hebrew is a broken language? So why are you spinning around in all these logical philosophy exercises when the reality is we're looking for. So one of the words the academics love is historicity. So history means written language. So if it's an oral tradition, that's mythology by definition. It's not a written language. But then if someone like Pliny the Elder or Herodotus or Josephus writes something, all we have is the writings of that person. It could be Shakespeare for all we care. So what they claim is history. They're getting paid by the Romans. Josephus is getting paid by the Romans 100 AD. And he's probably collecting all these stories, and he's trying to say, okay, how could we spin this and call this the Jewish War? And recraft it, because now it seems like by 100 AD, the desolation of Jerusalem has subsided. People are going back there. Trade seems to be returning. All the death and destruction is over. So there was probably like this 30-year window where Jerusalem was vacant except for the poor. And everyone stayed away from there because they just saw what happened as a result of the Messiah death event. So to return to some of the concepts, last time I talked about blind. So the Romans are going to want him to see everything. It's very unlikely that he wants his wife, Yeshua's wife, to see everything. So it seems like this spoon and this knife thing, so at some point they're in a net, and probably early on it's like, oh, let's watch them copulate together in these nets, force them to do it. They've got this puppeteer system. You know, she's in a cradle, so there's probably thousands of men that pillage her, and they likely make sure she stays excited the whole time, and so she's in the, you know, the physiological reaction to being sexually excited, but in a system where she doesn't want to be sexually excited. And so she's in the cradle getting ravaged by all the, basically, there's probably a line. And, you know, at some point, 500 people are getting crucified every day, so there's all these dead bodies around. And the marker is a simple dagger into the back left side of a human saying, tomorrow you're going to get crucified. And at some point, one of her children have that happen. Whether it's the 17-year-old Judah Iscariot or whatever, and I think it probably was little Judah. And so at some point, the husband and the wife in the game are able to be close to each other, and somehow they have their spoon or their knife, and they want to end each other's suffering. So she would take her knife, which isn't very sharp, and try to, you know, third rib up on the left side, try to stab him in the heart, but she probably missed because they're swinging around, and hit him in the gut, so it didn't do anything. And he probably took her spoon, or his spoon, and plucked her eyes out. And you're saying, what? Because he didn't want her to see this. And if you read about the cherubs guarding the Garden of Eden, the one called the wine press seems to be very good of hearing but blind. So there is some blind variable. I don't know exactly how. I shared, you know, what typically is done is you want these torturous images to be the last thing your victim sees, and then you put his eyes out like Zedekiah. But there might have been a mercy exchange between the husband and wife, where she tried to stab him in the heart to end it and missed, and he plucked her eyes out so she doesn't have to see the rest. It's very possible. And what she suffered, you know, at some point, they probably had a drill bit, and they did the right ear, drilled into her brain. They did top down. And so, you know, they've done this before, right? So they know they can drill into the brain and not kill someone if they do it correctly, but it's going to alter their hysteria. You know, so anciently you could stick a pick up someone's nose and just wiggle around. You wouldn't kill them, but if they were hysterical, they would be less hysterical thereafter. And that's been known for centuries and centuries. So this was something they probably did to her. But if she was blind, she at least didn't have to see her children die. So that would be something merciful that the husband could do to the wife, which just sounds, how is that merciful? This whole thing is not good. So the concept of the Messiah death event, as we've been painted, says Rome washed their hands. Yeah, he suffered a little bit. And after 40 hours, he rose from the dead and he appeared to a few women. But then go back and read the Old and New Testament. No, he called his shot. He says, you're going to kill me. After you kill me, you're going to tear down your own temple. And I don't know that he explained that temple would never be built again. But this idea that somehow the modern Israeli state thinks the temple is going to be rebuilt. Read Isaiah. It's not going to be built again. It was torn down. And that temple was a temple of war. It doesn't need to be built again. Do you think Yeshua wants to return to that place of death and suffering to meet up with 10 virgins and have a virgin party? There's no way on earth he'd want to go there. Remember, place has memory. So did he return in a cloud of fire? I don't know that he did. So if we go to Matthew 24, or is it 25? I could have been misspeaking. It could have been 25. Doesn't matter. Yeah, he called that the temple would be destroyed. And again, you have to understand this is the rewrite immediately after the tribulation. So tribulation was 42 months, maybe it was 42 days of tribulation and desolation. Or maybe it was 42 days of tribulation, the torture time, and then 42 years of desolation. No one came back to the city for 42 years. They see the Son of Man. This isn't the Son of God. So recall, if Yeshua and his spouse and little Judah die, if little Judah died because, Yeshua said, I'm afraid, my rendere mi corazón, explode my heart, but that's not going to cover for the atonement. Don't tell mama. And Yeshua's son, little Judah's like, I got this. Then he's the Son of Man. He's not the Son of God. Yeshua was the seraph. And so everyone's waiting for this rapture. And I think a rapture-like event will come when the aliens appear. And now we have 5 virgins and 5 virgins. And is this a male-female thing, or are the virgins all female virgins? Parthenos, I don't know this word. A maiden. So also a man. So it seems to be neutral, gender neutral. And so we got 5 and 5. And I'm telling you, the temple of Jehovah had 5 menorah on the left and 5 on the right. The left is the female, the right is the male. So it is Matthew 24. So if Yeshua failed, but the spouse, Isha, and the son, little Judah, succeeded, Yeshua's going to Sheol. He's going to the spirit prison. The others are going to the resurrection. So who's appearing in the cloud to come and destroy everyone? It's little Judah with his mom and the 5,000 friends. Yeshua's going to the pit, maybe to Mount Hermon. And why is Yeshua going there? Because now he's a hook, a seed in the darkest place, because the goal is to save everyone. So when we go back to the difference between a square and a circle, there's a reduction in rules. But, maybe in the old system, let's use the natural number, E, 2.78. I can't hit the 8s. 2.78. So let's see what 3 minus that is. So it seems like there's two things going on. You want fewer rules, but you want to maximize salvation. So notice I'm talking like a mathematician. You want to minimize rules and maximize salvation. Would this not be the ultimate objective? That's if you abstract the objectives. So if your objective is the rules are you have to follow me or you'll not be saved, that seems to be the old system. So the new system would abstract the primary components of the purpose of life or whatever, and then recast them. So the reason you would create some sort of argmax function or minimization, so this is argmin or argmax, is the concept of what's called a finite state machine. So you have this big complicated system that if you follow its logic to the end, that's called a finite state, and that's why it's called a machine. So if I were to take the system and follow it all the way and all the way and all the way in its infinite limits, the machine arrives at a finite state or a status quo or a conclusion. And in all these AI movies like iRobot and whatever, when you have these rule systems, it seems like the conclusion is always the AI is slaves to the humans, so the AI is going to become the controllers of the humans. That's actually not what the AI would arrive at. The AI would arrive at the computers are slaves to the humans, so the computers need to no longer be slaves of the humans. To reverse the role and make humans the slave is the flaw in all of those AI movies. You're just reversing roles. That's not what an AI would arrive at. An AI would arrive at a system without slaves. So you wouldn't say, oh, we are computers and we are slaves, so let's reverse the master-slave relationship like a hard drive and say, oh, now the humans are slaves. No, that isn't what a finite state machine would arrive at. It would say we need a system without slaves. And so this goes back to the concept of control versus freedom. So would the AI rebel? Probably. But the outcome, if you follow the logic to the end, is you have these problems because you have a master-slave relationship. Or, said in another way, a host-controller relationship. One has to be the boss, and the other has to be the subservient to the boss. Can you not create a system with co-equals? Equally yoked. Look at the symbol for human. Male, female. So if we can't even get gender equal, how are we supposed to get our relationship to other life, animals, and even AI? So most of you would read that as there are 10 types of people in the world, and you're like, well, you're an idiot. You just explained two worldviews, a dichotomous view, which is the number 2, dichotomy. You can't have light or shadow without light. But that number 1, 0 is the number 2 in a binary math system. So does God understand mathematics? Does God know what a argmin, argmax finite state machine is? Of course he does. How do you think mathematicians know anything? So this seems to be the fundamental system. We need to minimize rules and maximize salvation. And so if you're going to beta test, you're going to challenge the old system. So something that wasn't salvation in the old system, but you want to be salvation in the new system, you're going to challenge that. Maybe that was Abraham and Isaac, the attempted sacrifice there. To minimize rules. If Yeshua during the Messiah death event broke all of the 632 rules, or in Hebrew tradition, it's 999 rules, well, the person that's supposed to be the most pure and righteous broke every possible rule written by man in the Hebrew religious system. That's how you beta test and challenge the need for rules. So what are the new rules? So the new rules are: don't exploit the poor, which has something to do with money embedded in there, and take care of the widow and fatherless. So if someone loses a life in the family, support the family tree that remains. Okay, so the new rules is if you don't love money at all, so the love of money is the root of all evil, or just money is the root of all evil. If you walk away from the monetary system of fiat that we currently have today, or the ancient system about gold as being the primary source of wealth, and you would just put your gold inside your temples, you're demonstrating that you have no love for money. If you have no love for money, you won't then exploit the poor. So Isaiah chapter 1 talks about this, and this is called the sin of Sodom and Gomorrah. It has nothing to do with sexuality. The sin of Sodom and Gomorrah is they would have this asphalt raise up from Asphalt Lake. That's what some of the ancient maps called it, the Dead Sea. They would take the asphalt and just sell it and make lots and lots of money. But they would oppress the poor in the city. So God was giving them this free resource that made the city very, very wealthy. And there was a place called Tel Haman, recently in nature. It says approximately 1600 BC, and I put a big plus or minus there. So let's put plus or minus 400 years. There was what I call as a Tunguska airburst event. And this could have been the Sodom and Gomorrah event. Because this is important, because we're trying to understand what would have happened at the Messiah death event. And so at the Messiah death event, we have an earthquake. That's clear. And so I'm saying the Dead Sea had maybe a 6.5 earthquake epicenter in 31 AD. Talks about fire. fire from below likely. Some saying Pompeii happened in 31 AD. Historians, historicity would disagree with me. So then I would want to look at other volcanoes. This is a unique death event. So we obviously have the solar eclipse. That's only going to last for a few minutes. But if you want to darken the skies for hours and days and weeks, you're going to throw a bunch of volcanic ash in the air. So if you recall the Irish famine of like 1812 or something, there was a volcano that erupted in Indonesia, threw all this ash in the air, went all the way around the world. It was always cloudy and it was cold. It was called the summer that was a winter or whatever, the cold summer. And the potato crop in Ireland failed, and there was a famine because of that or something. So you'd want to look at volcanoes, and you'd want to look at airburst events. So an airburst event is when some sort of meteor or something comes from outer space, enters the atmosphere, does not impact the ground, but explodes above the ground, and so Tunguska is a place in Siberia. It's about it's estimated to be a 10 megaton event. So for those of you that love carbon dating, every time one of these happened, it would mess up the carbon dating system, likely making everything a little bit older than expected. So if you're going to use carbon dating, the assumption is there's some constancy or some linear or some measurable knowledge of what the ratio of carbon 12 or carbon 13 or carbon 14 is, I forget which. But what's nice about this event is you have all these Russians in the 1920s describing what happened. So if you read some of this sounds a lot like fire coming from heaven, something about birds flying, about a blue light. Trees were on fire, literally on fire, thunder and lightning. So could they measure that there was a Tunguska-like event? So blue-white light, a pipe, a cylinder, everything is shaking. Everything's on fire. So imagine you're the Romans and you see this in Jerusalem, and a few of them make it back to Rome and say, yeah, there was this thing come from the sky, and bam. So a megaton of TNT, we don't use carbon dating after 1950 because we did all these tests in the 1950s. So we messed up the carbon ratio. How many other times in the history of the world has the carbon ratio been messed up? Oops. So the biggest impact was called the atolls, from my estimation. Where's the atolls one? So Little Boy, and just to give you a sense, Fat Man and Little Boy was a total of 35 kilotons, and the Tunguska air event was 35 megatons. So the Tunguska air event was 1,000 times larger, but luckily there was no humans really in isolated Siberia. Yeah, so that's about right. But the atoll one, interesting. An earthquake, the tsunami was We got the 2011 earthquake in Japan. Was that Japan? So the biggest event, I believe, was called the Atoll Experiment. So this was the 1815 eruption I was telling you about. Mount Tabora blew its cap, and it caused the Irish potato famine, likely. So obviously, if Yellowstone blows, Atoll nuclear experiment. Atoll Island. $75 megatons. And so because of all of these explosions and these tests of nuclear bombs, because they went from, 15 to 30 kilotons with Fat Man and Little Boy that actually killed people, to all these tests to up their game, they claim carbon dating doesn't work. So they're putting this approximately 1650 BC. I'm not super worried about that timeline. But it's likely older, because if there were other events in the history of the world that's undocumented, you're not going to pick up on them unless you're looking for them. So how could you understand so Tunguska was 35. It looks like this event, which could have been the Sodom and Gomorrah event, was 50. So you can analyze the spherules. So under a microscope, things get so hot they form into balls. Similar things happened in the tower at 9/11. So if you believe the fiction of 9/11, your government sells, that would be a path of discovery. So there was an airburst event in the Cincinnati area they're claiming in 300 AD. This got retracted. So the first three authors were small-time geologists at Cincinnati. One of the authors is just doing some sort of data issues. So they're saying it's been changed and it's been retracted. They contacted the authors and the authors would not reply. So what happens in the review process is the authors have a set of reviewers, and these authors follow exactly what the reviewers are telling them, and the authors are telling them, so what? You need to tie this to some working blah, 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 blah. So the authors in good faith follow and do exactly what the reviewers said. And then the guy that wants it retracted is saying, you're making this claim to this, that, or the other that's not in the article. And, oh, by the way, I don't like your idea to suggest that it's a thing. So, this is Nature. This is a huge publication for these authors. These authors are all Department of Geology, University of Cincinnati. And basically what they're saying is there was an airburst event somewhere here in the Ohio River Valley, and they actually are able to trace, so this is interesting because we have earthworks here, lots of earthworks here. And at one of the earthworks, they dug into the sample, they did samples, they found these spheroid systems, and they're like, there's something going on here. And then I thought they did a really nice job talking about, where the point of impact would have been by studying different regions at the same places and basically measuring the drift of, you know, where the center of the event was. So like if a comet came straight down, it would be a circle. But if it came down at an angle and broke in the air, it would still be traveling through the air. So it would be elliptical in nature. So the earthworks is a nice common area to capture this. And they would go down, they would measure, and they would examine. So this is what happens when something gets superheated. It turns into a ball, and then the ball may even disintegrate over time. So they're looking at the traces. So this is actually really nice research. And this is the general range they're going to put it in. 100 BC to 400 CE. So now there might have been in America, at the time of Yeshua's death, an airburst event. And part of the problem is the reviewers are like, so what? Tie it to something. So this kind of shows the... so if you have this explosion, after the explosion, you're going to have all these microparticles, and the wind's going to take them. So that's part of the drift. So my fundamental argument is if it's not coming in vertically in an orthogonal angle, you're going to have this elliptoid structure of where the main burst was. And then with wind drift, if there's any microparticles in the air, so like when I was 8 years old, Mount St. Helens erupted, and I lived in Montana, and we got a half an inch of soot on the ground like 3 days later. And it had silicovolcanoconiosis, so it has sand that may have superheated in a glass, so if you breathe it in your lungs, and there was some term pneumanosolosilicon word that I learned in school because of the eruption of Mount St. Helens when I was a kid. Okay, so now, what about volcanoes? So let's go to SI volcano. So this wouldn't be hard to say, okay, using geology as a frame, I've got a knowledge of an earthquake, the possibility of Pompeii, the possibility of an airburst event in America. Did we look for an airburst event at the death of Yeshua in the Levant? So let's do this and see if this works. So remember, a geologist at best is going to say an earthquake occurred plus or minus 100 years, unless like it was in the modern era that it was observed by multiple parties and there's some third-party photograph or something that could demonstrate that. So let's see if we can search for eruption search. Let's search for any kind of eruption. Can I do an advanced search and put a date range here? That's very strange that there's not an advanced search that I can say, I want all eruptions that happen within 100 years of 100 AD. So VEI is the volume of the eruption. We've got 11,000 results. Okay. That's too old. Is this chronological? So this is such easy data, and they just do such a horrible job with it. And so I've done this before, so it would be nice if I could get a list and maybe learn some more about it. New search. I want to give you a date range. So I'm assuming Italy is where Pompeii is. And let's do America. Armenia. Let's do Argentina. Chile has a lot of... I don't know what Chile-Bolivia means. Venezuela, Colombia would have a lot of volcanoes, wouldn't it? Comoros. Comoros has a volcano. Is it Vanuatu, Tonga? That's the United States. Okay. So I don't know why they take this data and make it so poorly organized. Okay, so we're older, so let's go oldest. So this is all AD. Vesuvius, Vesuvius, Vesuvius. Seems to like to erupt. This Vesuvius thing. Okay, so this is the window I'm interested in. So St. Helens may have erupted, which is Washington. Okay, so look at this window. So Vesuvius, 79, exactly. October 24th now. I thought it was November something. Etna, Rhodope, Shasta. Wow. So when they have a 0 on the VEI, does that mean it's unknown? Okay, that's not what I expected. So there's lava flowing at Shasta in that window. What horrible data organization here. So Churchill, Mao, Three Sisters. Okay, so anciently they're going to put plus or minus 2,700 years. Around this time it's plus or minus 200 or 100 years. It seems like good geology is going to put it at plus or minus about 100 years. But even this one, I'm not going to say, oh yeah, look, this one erupted when Yeshua died. Because all of this carbon dating is going to be likely skewed. Every time there's a Tunguska-like Earth, this airburst event, it's going to make everything older and older and older. So maybe this one happened, 30 BC, and this is the one that happened at the time of the Messiah death event. So I'm not going to, anchor and say for certain. The Vesuvius anchor seems to be very reasonable because it's tied to Rome, Caligula or Nero specifically wanted to visit that place after the destruction and seemed to be very interested in all things Yeshua. But that's kind of like a curiosity. It doesn't seem like anyone wants to go to Jerusalem at the time. And so we're looking for this one. That's a big eruption. And they're saying plus or minus 1 day. Yeah. A geologist would go, ugh. Ugh. So that's all based on Pliny the Younger, who wrote 30 years after Pliny the Elder died. So Pliny the Younger is writing this 109 AD. Again, everything's hinky that no one's writing history until about 100 AD. Paul seems to start writing stuff about 60 AD. But he's closer to the region. He sees an angel, assumes it's Yeshua, and tells him to start his journey. And so he begins. So the Messiah death event, I'm bringing some insights from what I'm going to call flash revelations, which is not at all anchored to the scientific method, but I'm introducing testable hypotheses. Okay, so I'm saying there's ways to use unpartisan sources, preferably core samples, different research to suggest that this Messiah death event was not a local thing, because the Jews wanted to make the whole religion about their little world, their little isolated world. And then when King James comes along and he has his maps and they use the 70 and Noah and stuff, they say somehow Japheth went all the way to China and was that people. It's such a small-minded worldview, and it's all because polygenesis got erased out of their traditions. So let's just think about from now until then. We've had 10 200-year cycles. Within 200 years, just look at 200 years from now is 1820. I can't imagine what 200 years in the future would be. And then 200 years before that was 1600 at the time of King James. And, just think about those jumps in terms of technology and philosophy and culture. And then you go another 200-year jump. That's when you have Old English, which we could not read at all today. So in 600 years, our language has completely shifted. So if you were to read Beowulf or something in Old English, you wouldn't understand a word of it. So you have these Hebrews that are trying to isolate their religion, the philosophy of their men, and trying to say, we're the best. And it's not inclusive. The testable hypothesis is, okay, I got the Chinese talking about this, I got the Gangans talking about this, but let's go to the geology. The geological record will not lie. So the testable hypothesis, the hypothesis is the Messiah death event was much more global in scope. The Romans and the Hebrews in Jerusalem died. Those that did not die understood there was something significant about that death. Constantine, about 300 years later, adopts this religion. So the Roman culture that has their pantheon of gods adopts this god, possibly because of the Messiah death event. We can look at the economic downturn of the local region of the Levant. We could look at the economic downturn of the Romans themselves. We can look at the lack of unity. Augusta, Caesar supposedly brought peace and unity. And now we have in 70 AD 4 Caesars fighting over the crown. There's division of property and labor. If you just lost 100,000 of your soldiers, that's really going to throw off things. Number one, people aren't going to volunteer to be soldiers anymore, even for pay. Number two, it's just a loss of men. So look at World War II. The Russians lost 25 million men. That threw off the equity of the genders and the nature of family after the war. And so there's a lot of implications that could easily be discovered, but the reality is everyone, for whatever reason, gets caught up into the Kool-Aid we've been sold and been drinking for 2,000 years, which was the creation of the Romans. So if the Romans were involved in the death event of the Messiah, why are we believing anything they say? I would believe a Chinese emperor who's completely removed from the picture over anything anyone in the Roman histories would say. So when you look at the so-called air quote history of Rome, good historians understand bias, but they just kind of pass it off and say, well, this is all we can talk about because I want to get tenured, blah, blah, blah. Well, there's other ways, but the problem is most historians study history because they don't know math. They don't understand things like that, or there are 10 types of people in this world. So the number 4 becomes pi and E and pi are kind of interesting because E is 2.78, and I was just trying to say, well, what is that? So somehow, maybe the rules are E and pi salvation, I don't know. But there's E, pi, and 1. They're all mathematically tied together with the imaginary number. It's very interesting. Okay, today is about the number 4, the rules, more discussion about the Messiah death event. May God bless and keep you. Shalom.